And there are a number of ministers who are very, very lonely. I can say over the years, as we sit together, when it comes to ministry, the last hand I squeeze is my wife's hand before I go to the pulpit. It's the first time I'm saying this publicly, but it's true. But it's symbolic. You got my back, and I'm with you.
Hello, Wagwan. Welcome to Design to Win, the show that gives you the roadmap to win at life with a little Caribbean flavor. Coming up in today's show is part 2 of our interview with Dr. David Corbin and his wife, Launa Corbin. They've been married for 48 years. And in our last interview, they took us up to the point of pioneering a new ministry and how they navigated the challenges of that. In part 2, we're going to be looking at how they continue to serve in ministry, their return to Jamaica, Dr. Corbin's tenure as the president of the Caribbean Graduate School of Theology, how he ended up in that position, and how he ended up pastoring Mona Heights Chapel and what's next for them. So I invite you to stay tuned as we get into that interview. And at the end, I'm going to be sharing a very important quote from this couple that I believe will help married couples to work together better and ensure they have wonderful marriages and ministry if you are working together in that regard. Let's get on to the interview.
I'm very thankful that we took our children along with us, because for them, it turned into an exciting time. I wasn't the mother who stayed home while daddy went out to preach. I had seen that in many families where for years I knew this brother as a preacher. I've never met his wife. Not so with the Corbins. When he's going out to preach, it's an outing for all of us. And I think part of the excitement for them is like, where are we going this morning? And where will we have lunch? If we took them to a nice place to have lunch, then it was always great to go out with mommy and daddy. Or if the people invited us for lunch, so they could see that other people can entertain us as well. So it was always an exciting thing for them. And I think they became part of how we prayed for the ministry and how we expected God to provide for the ministry. And when he did provide, we all rejoiced together.
Awesome. So I love it. I like the fact, for example, Francis Schaeffer is one of the authors and ministers that I loved, and his wife had a similar gift in hospitality, and that afforded them to have the student ministry. I think it was Library. And I hear the same thing coming out. So food is not just a way to a man's stomach, but food is a way to support the ministry, to establish a ministry, because that, and I love the teamwork, because that is how I met you. So when I was invited by Dr. Corbin to do the presentation on how to publish, there you were with the tasty treat at the lunch and lecture. And so I'm happy that you emphasized that you were in this thing together, and two can't walk unless they agree, because sometimes part of the struggle is that when the couples got together, ministry wasn't what they wanted. It is what one partner wants, it's not what the other wants. And so there is this tug of war. So what would you say to those couples then, who is along the marriage, along the path, that one person has decided that I feel God is calling me into traditional full-time ministry, and the other wants to remain a professional like you were, Mrs. Corbin? What are some of the tips to navigate those challenges for couples?
I do believe that God can and does speak to an individual. Your first mission is not the mission field, is your partner. To share that vision, to sell that vision, that person needs to come on board. The person may not come on board full-time in terms of saying, I would resign my job. But the person needs to accept that you're inviting me to partner with you in this, you can be guaranteed my support. Because if you do not get full support from your partner, what you're inviting is unnecessary conflict in your ministry. In ministry, there are very lonely moments. You take, for instance, ministers who go out and preach at a special event, and they see no visible response to their preaching. And the church that may have invited them, they are expecting results. And so it's in a sense, it's like, is this a waste? And you're driving home with that feeling, and you go home and your partner is not interested in what happened. It can become extremely lonely. And there are a number of ministers who are very, very lonely. I can say over the years, as we sit together when it comes to ministry, the last hand I squeeze is my wife's hand before I go to the pulpit. It's the first time I'm saying this publicly, but it's true. But it's symbolic. You got my back, and I'm with you. And so we part from each other. And I go with the assurance that if no one else is supporting me, see that woman who just held my hand, she is with me. And that support is critical for the ministry.
During the pandemic is when you resumed your pastoral role. At the same time, I think you were finishing up your term at CJST, but you can correct me if it's at the end or during the transition. But how did you manage to pastor in this new season, and what tips do you have for others who are in this new season, a new way of doing church?
All right. Firstly, I did not come to Jamaica to pastor. I came to Jamaica to be an educator. But during the first week of my term of service, my tenure, someone approached me at church and said, I have news for you. I do not believe you came to Jamaica just for the graduate school to be an educator. I believe God called you to provide leadership to this church. I said, I did not want to dismiss, was a very responsible woman. I said, I appreciate what you're saying, but in my spirit, I don't sense that. And I had to swallow my words, because before completing my 3-year term at the graduate school, different members of the congregation approached me and asked if I didn't think I would want to serve. I said, well, that's not the procedure here. The pattern at this church is that they operate without pastors. They have leaders, just elders. And so you're asking me now to blaze a trail. I can't do that on my own. But I had a conviction in my heart that I could write to the leadership and let them know what was happening, and to get a sense from them, is this how you are thinking? If you are thinking along these lines, I'm willing to have a conversation with you. I must admit, my wife did not agree with my writing that letter, but because it was just an inquiry, she said, go ahead. And so the letter was written, we met with the leadership, and they said to us very clearly, they had never discussed it officially, but they were willing to give it some thought. And listen to this, I want my listeners to hear this. We took a decision, very much my wife's working on this. Honey, we got the answer we wanted. They do not want you. So tell them you don't want you, but we're not pursuing.
We're withdrawing.
And we're withdrawing any interest. And I wrote to them that I was withdrawing the interest. Don't ask me how this is possible. It is the only email that was never delivered. It was sent as an email, and it never reached them. So they continued pursuing, and we kept wondering why. And after an agreement was signed, I asked them if they never got the letter. They asked which letter. A negative letter of withdrawal, never received. So sometimes God opens doors. Sometimes he closes doors. But to us, that was a clear indication. This is where I want you to go, and you don't come in the way and try to stop it.
I am noticing a trajectory throughout your entire life. From seminary until now. Mrs. Corbin was determined to go one route. You were determined to go back to Trinidad single. And I'm seeing God constantly overriding your desires to ensure that his will is being done. So even at this stage in your retirement, we're seeing him overriding that again to establish his will.
Yes.
And we need to understand this. My wife is not a yes woman. She is not from my amen corner. She has a mind of her own. And in coming on to the church, I said to the Lord, I will not proceed unless I have her blessing. But knowing her, she said to me, you have 90% of my blessing. She just wants to keep that 10% to see. I'll hold on to that. For me, 90% is enough. I know her. But at the end of the mission, or sometimes midway in the mission, you hear her say, this was really the Lord's doing. But you need to know your partner. If I were to piggishly say, I will not move unless I get 100%, I will never move, right? But at the same time, if it were a case, don't go there, I would go back to the Lord and I would be willing to change. But sometimes it requires just a little time, and that has been the pattern in our lives. And I would like to believe that she's happy with that.
Are you, Mrs. Corbin?
Let's just say I'm satisfied.
All right, but quickly, because we're going to wrap up soon. The challenges of pastoring. We're used to going to church, and many of our churches were resistant to technology. That's the part about COVID that I am happy for. It's forcing innovation and change.
Yes.
How have you managed in this season to pastor? What are some of the things that you've been doing to make it work?
Well, one of the things, the matter of innovation, thankfully, we have in our congregation extremely competent people in terms of technology. And they were using technology primarily as a backup, but now they realized it needed to be viewed as a ministry. And so it wasn't very, very much of a difficult transition to move into, to change that perspective in terms of ensuring we had our own Zoom account, ensuring that we now have a website where people can access information, and we are going to become an online church. Whether we want to move in that direction or not, the conditions dictate that we move in that direction. And so I became a COVID pastor. And so much of our ministry is this way. Now, there are some challenges in that the strengths that we have in terms of use of our dining table, we had to surrender that. And so some of our older folks have not even been able to visit them as we would, which is a normal pastoral function. And so much of our communication is via Zoom. It so happens even counseling and interviewing people is via Zoom. And so we sit at home, but very, very much happens right here. And so the ministry is no longer at the dining table, but in our homemade studio, which is where we are right now. And those are some of the challenges and the opportunities. Also, in like just a few days ago, I was ministering at a convention in Trinidad, and distance is no longer a problem when it comes to ministry because of the internet. And there are 1 or 2 Sundays I've been invited out to speak, but I have a commitment at church. And so I can do one as a pre-recorded thing. And so I'm in 2 places during one time slot. And so the internet has provided challenges, but I would say out of those challenges have come opportunities. And we have attempted to respond to those opportunities. So we had a dinner, for instance, a family dinner online. And you say, but how is that possible? Well, what Mrs. Corbin did, she simply prepared a menu and said, we want husbands and wives to choose one of these 3. And so they worked on their menus. And after they had eaten, then we met online to talk about who did what. And it became a marriage event. And we had our dessert. We had our dessert in front of each other. And we talked while we talked. And we used it and became an occasion. And so it is, what is that in your hand? And how can you use that? The circumstances would differ. On one occasion, what you have in your hand could turn into a serpent. But on another occasion, it could become a fishing rod. But the sitting situations differ. But it's still, what is it in your hand? And God is able to use what's in your hand to accomplish his purposes.
I love it. I love it. What is in you? I like this because you're in your retirement season. and you're still doing pioneering work. And there are many who believe, you know, after you get to a certain age and stage, you can't bother. And with this new COVID thing, I just want to leave that to the younger generation. But here you are, as a couple together in this season, you are still innovating, you're still doing pioneering work, you're still serving, and you're still rising to the challenge. And I am greatly encouraged by that, because sometimes in my head I'm saying, oh, but you're at this age and you haven't done certain things yet. Or that was just the big people in the Bible. Here I have a couple who are still charting new paths and taking on new challenges. And it is a good example beyond what is in scripture. So I want to commend both of you.
It comes from scripture too. Remember this. Paul was in prison when he wrote 2 Timothy, when he said, when you're coming, bring the books and the parchments. And so although it appeared as though he could not do anything while in prison, many of the letters we are reading today from the New Testament were written from prison. So where has God planted you? Where are you? And your from your prison experience, others can benefit. But the point about bring the books and the parchments was, let me keep my mind active, right? And so he kept his mind active by asking for this. And we believe we should keep our minds active. But we are not going out to become pastor of 5 million, 5,000. No, you've got to be realistic. You've got to realize where you are in the journey. I am no longer the evangelist, but I bring lessons from the evangelism that I did years ago. And I can now help the evangelist. I can pray for the evangelist. I can teach evangelists. But I am utilizing my skills, our skills, in different ways. And for Mrs. Corbin, it's such a delight to see people who learned catering from her, including our own grandchildren. We can go to that house and they can prepare a meal from beginning to end. And I'll tell you honestly, when our granddaughter fixes something, I cannot tell whether she did it, her mother did it, or her grandmother did it. And this is when she was 13, 14. And so it's a matter of passing on the skills. And our delight, I'm no longer needing to build my resume. I don't have to build my resume. So all that I do, all that I have belongs to others. I see the value of stewardship. I can now pour into the life of others. Why hold it? Awesome. I've never seen someone take a resume in a casket. Neither have I seen a bank statement go in a casket.
Those are solid points.
Right? But I've heard people talk about the lives that were touched because of the deceased, not the state of his account or the state of his resume.
One more point to our togetherness. There are many folks who write, or we write to, on WhatsApp or even Messenger. And I believe maybe 80% of the persons, they don't know who they're writing to. Because when he's busy with a class, either teaching or preparing sermons or so on, and something comes in, and I write back to them, my dear brother, so and so and so. And they write back, oh, brother, it was wonderful to hear from you. They have no clue who they're talking to.
You're letting the cat out the bag, Mrs. Corbin.
So I'm his private correspondent to all and sundry. And he gets, oh, it was so nice hearing from you.
I wonder if some of the messages I get have been from you. But we'll find out another time.
Yeah, after knowing each other for decades, it's amazing how you are so similar in the way you express yourself.
Wow.
And so this is why they aren't able to tell the difference.
So I get called my brother a lot.
And the interesting part is when they end, brother, please convey my regards to your wife.
That's funny. So as we bring this interview to a close, what's next for the Corbins? What's next?
Well, who knows?
Well, we plan to leave Jamaica at the end of November. That's firm. Tickets have been bought. We moved to South Florida, and we are going to embark on probably our biggest step of faith, in that we are moving to South Florida and we do not have a home to which we are going. We do not have a car that we would be driving, and those are necessary. And so we're going to have to trust God, the same God who showed us he could manage matters on earlier years. How it's going to happen, I say to you honestly, I don't know. Would God pull it off again? He will. How do I know that? He's in the pulling off business. He has a track record, not only in the Bible, but thousands of years of his faithfulness to his people, how he has provided. And that's a whole other interview to see how God has provided for us through housing. And I'm just excited, waiting to see how he would pull it off. I don't have a clue who he may choose to use. I don't know what doors he may open. I no longer have youth in my favor to say I can find an alternative source of income. It is clearly trusting him. And I don't know what he will do, but I know he will do it. And that's what we are looking for.
We'll do it again. I want to thank you very much, Dr. Corbin and Mrs. Corbin, for sharing on this episode of Design to Win. You've shared a lot of gems for us and have, most importantly, presented an example of strong marriage and ministry and what God can do in the lives of people who are completely sold out to him. So thank you very much.
A pleasure. God bless.
All right, take care. Bye-bye. I trust that you enjoyed that interview. And this is a quote I want to share from my conversations with Dr. and Mrs. Corbin, is that as a couple, they've always challenged each other towards excellence rather than competing for prominence. And if we had more time, you would have heard more about how they did that. And they serve as a role model for couples in ministry, how you can win as a couple and navigate the different seasons of life and the challenges in ministry, especially in the new normal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we can also learn from them that God can call you to serve in different ways at different stages of your journey. And so sometimes when you think you should be retired and not doing anything else, that's a time too when God can and often recommissions you to do something new. And as we close out the show, let's say our pledge to win. There's greatness in me. It's possible to live my dreams, no matter how bad it is or how bad it gets. I'm going to make it. With faith, courage, and consistent action, I'm going to make it. It's not over until I win. This is Ruth Taylor saying, ta for now, until next time.